Welcome to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
And I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is episode 3 for chapter 3, Edmund and the Wardrobe. Welcome back, Phil.
So good to be back. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, we left off with our last episode, which I really enjoyed doing that with you, Phil, because I feel like I just have a much better appreciation for Mr. Tumnus now that you've kind of explained to me a little bit more about him. And Lucy has now gone, back into Narnia, and we're going to see what happens there. Do you have any kind of addendums or anything you want to add to the last episode before we jump in to our chapter summary?
Yeah, just to add on to that, I've always enjoyed this, talking about the same piece of content with someone else, because you do get a different perspective. And also, now that I think about it, I think we should bring some other people onto the show also, just to see what they think. I mentioned to a friend that we were doing this podcast, and he said, "Oh yeah, I love those books." I'm like, "Which ones?" He goes, all of them." I was like, "Wow, I haven't even read all of them." So it's always fun to hear what other people have to say about it.
So I guess are you admitting that now that you have not read all of these books?
I have not read all the books.
Okay, I think we don't think we've actually talked about this yet. I think I have read all of the books. I have not read all the books as an adult. So we plan on releasing these first 3 episodes kind of all together. So for people kind of listening when we're releasing, this might be I'm breaking the fourth wall here, obviously, but this might be kind of the last one they hear in this first string, and we're now admitting, we haven't read all the books before. We're owning that we are not experts in Narnia. We just love these books. Well, some of them.
Right.
But yeah, I think I did read all of them as a child. I have not read all of them as an adult. And so some books, like The Last Battle and The Horse and His Boy for me in particular, are quite fuzzy in my head. Like I know I know the main characters and I have an idea of the plot, but I don't remember a lot of the books. But these, especially the first 3 with Wardrobe and Caspian and Dawn Treader, I'm very familiar with those 3. So we got a couple of years or so until we got to go and visit those. But I appreciate your courage, Phil, in admitting on a Narnia podcast that you haven't read all the books.
It just feels good to talk about, finally get it out there.
That's good, man. I'm proud of you. Well, this is the part of the show now where we summarize the chapter we're going to talk about. So if you haven't read this chapter in a while, or if you just need to be reminded, it's an odd chapter, so I'm breaking it down using 150 words or less. Are you ready, Phil?
Here we go.
All right. Lucy returns to our world and reunites with her siblings. She is surprised to find that they have not been wondering where she was. Lucy entered the wardrobe hours ago, but it seems as if no time has passed. Peter, Susan, and Edmund all believe that Lucy is lying, but Edmund is particularly mean about it. Lucy stops mentioning Narnia and starts wondering if it truly was a dream altogether. On the next rainy day, the children decide to play hide-and-go-seek. Lucy returns to the room with the wardrobe and enters back into Narnia. Edmund follows her into the woods, but instead of finding his sister, Edmund meets a woman and a dwarf. The woman claims to be Narnia's queen. The chapter ends abruptly in the middle of Edmund and the queen's conversation. So that's it. That's chapter 3 for us.
Well done.
Yeah. So let's
Join us next time.
Yeah. Let's start with that first entry back into our world, which is actually what I think that's what C.S. Lewis always refers to, Earth as being. He just always calls it our world, which I really like. And again, that's kind of using that second person, kind of inviting us, the readers, into this world with him. It says, Lucy ran out of the empty room into the passage and found the other 3. "It's all right," she repeated. "I've come back." "What on earth are you talking about, Lucy?" asked Susan. "Why," said Lucy in amazement, "haven't you all been wondering where I was?" "So you've been hiding, have you?" said Peter. "Poor old Lou, hiding and nobody noticed. You'll have to hide longer than that if you want people to start looking for you." "But I've been away for hours and hours," said Lucy. The others all stared at one another. And then, of course, we get Edmund. "Batty," said Edmund, tapping his head. "Quite batty."
It's savage.
Yeah. And I love this this exchange. So far in this book, we really haven't gotten kind of just quick dialogue back and forth. There's been, a lot of exposition, not a lot, but there's been some exposition, some descriptive passages, and we haven't really gotten a quick, conversation between all four siblings since the first chapter when they just first arrived at the mansion. And again, we're seeing a little bit more of their dynamic between the siblings. Peter's like, oh, oh, Lucy, you gotta hide longer than that, like treating her like, the youngest. And um, eh, Susan seems to be trying to be a little bit understanding here, like, what are you talking about? And then Edmund's just like, yeah, you're crazy, you know.
Yeah.
Um, what are your thoughts on this, Phil?
Yeah. One thing that has stood out to me ever since I learned this, I took a couple of writing courses in college, and the thing they always say to people is show, don't tell. It would have been very easy to be like, then Lucy exited the wardrobe. Little did she know it had only been a few seconds, and she had been in there for hours. Isn't that strange? And instead, we have this great dialogue where you learn a little bit about each character. Peter is still kind of coming across as slightly more mature than everybody else. Um, Lucy is, earnest. Edmund's just mean. And then you also have Susan saying things like, don't be silly, kind of trying to gently explain, but also trying to be a little bit understanding. I love how he does that.
Yeah, and we don't get let's move on because we don't get a lot of C.S. Lewis never actually does say at first. No, like Lucy's right. He doesn't say that. She says
Yep.
this is a magic wardrobe. There's a wood inside. It was snowing. And then Lewis writes, the others did not know what to think, but Lucy was so excited that they all went back with her into the room. And then she shows them this wardrobe, and unfortunately, there's nothing but fur coats inside. And so for us as
And
readers, especially, oh, sorry, keep going, Phil.
a solid back. So somehow that portal has closed.
Uh huh. And it's for us as readers, and especially for children who are reading this, you're kind of like, wait, like, what was that real? And I know for my students reading this for the first time, they're reading this and being like, wait a second, like maybe that didn't happen, right? Because you have right now it's 3 against 1, being like, yeah, this didn't. What are you talking about? It looks normal. And so it's really fun when my students get to engage with this. And for those who are not familiar with the story, they're kind of like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like maybe this story isn't going where I thought it was going to go. And I
Right.
think a lot of that is C.S. Lewis is treating his readers. Well, he recognizes that they're children, but he treats them in a mature way.
Mm, which is key. And I think that he's treating them better than, say, like if you and I had someone come up to us and they were like, I just, went to this magical land and met a fawn, I'd be like, sure. You wouldn't believe that. Um, and I think that it's interesting how Lewis portrays that here.
Yeah, it's he treats them like with respect and dignity, and I really appreciate that. So obviously this exchange doesn't go well, and we find out that Lucy is having a miserable time now. Like it says, I'll read just a little bit because we can't read the whole book or else we'll get some calls from C.S. Lewis's estate, I assume. But
Yeah.
you know,
About how we're reading them out of order.
yeah. uh, so we get this. We're told by Lewis that she could have made it. Just said, I was just joking along and stuff. But Lucy was a truthful girl, and she knew she was really in the right, and she could not bring herself to say this. The others who thought she was telling a lie, and a silly lie too, made her very unhappy. The 2 elder ones did this without meaning to do it, but Edmund could be spiteful, and on this occasion he was spiteful. He sneered and jeered at Lucy and kept on asking her if she'd found any other countries in the cupboards all over the house. Which is just a very big brother thing to do when your big brother is 10 or 11 years old.
Yeah. And it seems like he's very smart and he has some wit to him and he's using it for evil right now.
Yeah. Um, what are your thoughts, Phil, as we kind of go back into this, and into our world? Because the story was kind of ramping up from chapters 1 and 2, and then Lucy returns, and now it's almost like the narrative has begun to even shift. And this is really the first time we're actually getting, like, we're spending more time here in this chapter in our world than in even the first 2 chapters, because Lucy goes into Narnia just a couple pages into the first chapter. Do you like being back here in our world, or do you find yourself kind of going like, well, when are we getting back to Narnia?
Right. I I think he does a very good job of having the time of day keep moving forward. I personally do not like stories very much where they're showing the same period of time but from different perspectives. I'm like, okay, let's go. Let's get moving. And this is a few days later, right?
Yeah, it's a couple
And
days later.
we're finding out more about Edmund, but we're still like we're having more of the focus on Edmund than we are on Lucy. So we're getting a different character's perspective, but the story is still moving forward in terms of time.
Yeah, it's true. And then as we kind of move along, I don't know about you, but I really start to develop a lot of sympathy for Lucy in this. Like, you're frustrated because, like, and I ask my students to do this too. We write this little activity where it's like, have you ever like known something to be true and no one believes you, right? And that's so frustrating, especially as a child, because you have this dynamic of one, right now no one believes you, but also you're a child, and if it's especially adults and you feel like you're in the right, you feel like there's also kind of a power dynamic there too. And so I know right off the back, my students are engaging with Lucy more than anyone else, and not just because we spent the most time with her, but because of the way that she's been presented by Lewis. And it makes me want to ask you this question, Phil. Do you feel like, and it might change as we go along, do you feel like Lucy is our protagonist, or do you feel like all four Pevensies are our protagonists? Like, who do you think is the main character in this story?
Yeah, I think up until this point it's been Lucy, but Edmund plays a pretty crucial role here as well. I still think Lucy's going to be the protagonist throughout. It seems like Edmund's going to be a close second, and I just don't see Peter and Susan coming in as much, based on what we know so far. How about you?
Yeah, I always wonder this myself, as I often have said. I read this book a lot. Lucy and Edmund are our two primary entryways into Narnia, and we kind of experience through both of their eyes. Even when Peter and Susan, we, when they enter Narnia, we won't go too far ahead, but it's different, and it's a different perspective we're given from them. And then as the story goes along, we won't talk too much of what comes on ahead, but as it goes along, I feel like we do though lose some of the Edmund and Lucy centrality to the story. Like, they just become part of the story and not maybe the main characters as the story grows. And that's one of the beautiful things about this book is it starts so small with these four children just um, leaving London and coming to the English countryside. Like, these are just four kids out of thousands and thousands of children in just one country or just one city being moved to the countryside during this entire large war that's global, right? So we start literally with World War II, and here's just four kids. So they're just a tiny part of this, of the world, and it's gonna grow into something so much bigger. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's and the same thing I think. But while that happens, I feel like we lose some of Edmund and Lucy's centrality. Does that make any sense?
It does, and I'm curious to see how that'll play out. I love going into a story with that kind of outside perspective, or like a general sense of what might happen, because then you get to see how it fits into that overall arc.
Phil, are you reading these like one chapter at a time, or have you read the whole book recently? I guess
I
I,
have
I
not,
don't know. So
yeah, I have not read the whole book recently. I do read the chapter at least once, usually at least twice, in preparation for this, and I read like maybe two or three at a time, just because it's so good. It's kind of hard to stop reading ahead, but I have not read the whole thing or the whole series in quite a while,
yeah, and
at least 12 years.
I think that's actually cool that we have those different perspectives. Where, especially for this book, I'm very familiar with it. I don't know everything. I'm not an expert, but I am familiar with the structure of the story and the characters. But you're kind of going just one chapter at a time. So I hope that listeners can engage with us on one of those two levels. Like, either you're reading this with us for the first time in a very long time, or you absolutely love these books and you know them backwards and forwards probably much better than I do. So I think that's actually fun. I would recommend you keep doing that so we can kind of have these two different approaches to the story.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, so getting back into the chapter, Lucy, they decide to play hide and seek, and I wanted to go over this passage here because you would think that after Lucy's been, teased by Edmund and just not believed by her older siblings, that during the hide and go seek game, she wouldn't want to go hide where the wardrobe was. And C.S. Lewis even acknowledges that. but I'm still somewhat confused about why she goes to this room. So I want to read you this film. Maybe you can answer it for me. Lucy went to the room where the wardrobe was. She did not mean to hide in the wardrobe because she knew that would only set the others talking again about the whole wretched business. But she did want to have one more look inside it, for by this time she was beginning to wonder herself whether Narnia and the Faun had not been a dream. So to me, I'm like, well, I guess she just wants to know if it's a dream or not, but then also isn't she doing this same thing where if her siblings catch her, they're still not going to believe her? Is that, like, what do you think's happening here?
And well, I think there's a couple things at play. First of all, I've also been in a situation where I'm like, I'm definitely not going to do this, but I'm going to go down and like for example with food, I'm not going to go eat more chocolate. And then I go downstairs, but I am going to like go to the pantry and look at it. And then then you're eating chocolate again because you're already there. Um, and I think that she doesn't want to go back, but it's almost like there's this kind of force drawing her to the wardrobe. And then you also factor in the curiosity part. So if I had had an experience like that, I'd want to know, like after a few days, like, was that a dream? And like you kind of go back and you either think about it or you go and you test it out for yourself. And I think that's what she's doing here. She's like, I know that it happened, but we also tested the wardrobe and there was a solid back to it. So what was that all about?
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I really like that take on it. She goes into this wardrobe, right? And again, can't forget this. She did not shut it properly because she knew that it was very silly to shut oneself into a wardrobe, even if it is not a magic one. Those like last couple of words make me go like, okay, he definitely is telling his readers not to do this.
Yeah. He's now brought it up 3 times. We haven't even finished 3 chapters yet. What we should do is look up the statistics on how many people got hurt by locking themselves in a
Oh
wardrobe
no, yeah.
around 1950.
Yeah. Um, and I read that too because it is, it keeps coming up, but also after it says, even if it is not a magic one, there's something that happens right here. I don't know if you recognize this, and I don't think I recognized this for a while, but again, I read this with students, and so we've looked at some of these things. But there's actually a perspective shift from Lucy to Edmund. We actually don't hear from Lucy for the rest of the chapter now. Did you pick up on this when you were reading it?
I did not.
Yeah, so she goes into the wardrobe and then
Oh,
we don't
Lucy. Yeah, I'm sorry. I got Lucy and Susan confused. I did think it was weird that we just I'm like, where did she go?
but I
I
kind
thought he
of
like walked past her and like she never went inside never went to Narnia.
yeah, and it's a fun thing in a couple of ways because one, it's necessary for the story. We now are going to hear from Edmund and his experience with the wardrobe, but it gives it this magical feel. Like last time we saw it was like someone, we saw it from Lucy's perspective. She goes into the wardrobe and we see the transition to Narnia. But this time, C.S. Lewis we're watching it almost from the outside. So we see her go into the wardrobe and then she just disappears. And so we're
Yep.
getting, and both of them are displaying these two kinds of Narnian magic, right? Like one, we actually get the whole, here's what that transition looks like. And the other, we're seeing, oh my gosh, this is what it looks like from our world.
We see 2 other things here too. So Lucy, when she goes into the wardrobe, she walks in a straight line and she starts to feel branches, and then she's in Narnia. Edmund doesn't seem too bright, I guess. It's like he like turned around and then turned around again, and he forgot which direction was which way. Because he starts heading toward Narnia thinking that the door blew open. And to me, I'm like, how can you get turned around that fast?
Yeah.
And so it just doesn't seem like he's that bright. But also, I'm curious about like he followed her in there. She like walks in, he sees her, he goes up to the wardrobe, and he follows her in. There's some weird time stuff going on there. I mean, she already spent hours in Narnia and then came back out, and it had only been moments or no time at all. And he follows her probably within 30 seconds. And then there's enough time for her to be completely missing. It's winter there. It's probably snowing. You'd think there'd be tracks, but it's been enough time that the tracks have been covered over by snow again.
Yeah. I hadn't even thought about that, Phil. That's so interesting. And I know we'll get into this more as we go deeper into the books and in this book, but I almost feel like the time is not even consistent in and of itself. That like sometimes it'll, this much time has passed, sometimes no time has passed.
Yeah.
And I like this idea of that, like, he gets there and there's no sign that Lucy was there. I mean, I don't think it says that necessarily, but I think we can infer that he would have seen her footprints, right? Like, that makes sense.
Yep.
Um, but
So we know
before
that it's been a significant amount of time, but you're right. There's no pattern as of yet. Like there, it's not like 1 second equals 3 hours.
yeah.
We don't know what the time is.
Which is, I think, a really fun kind of magical thing that we have is that C.S. Lewis is not telling us these things. But before Phil, we get into that wardrobe, we have to remember that Edmund jumps in and shuts the door behind him, and C.S. Lewis writes, "Forgetting what a very foolish thing this is to do." So we're already at 4 different times I'm on page 27, 4 different times. Not even 30 pages into the book, we've been told you really shouldn't do this. And here he's even like he's admonishing Edmund for doing it.
Right. And it's showing a little bit about his personality. I don't know if it really. We need to find a wardrobe. That should be like part of
Yeah.
this podcast is going and finding a real wardrobe. But if it really is a foolish thing, it certainly makes Edmund seem foolish.
Either way, Lewis is telling us that Edmund is foolish, right? Like either
Yeah.
way, we're getting. He's like, he's killing two birds with one stone. Hey kids, don't do this thing, but also look how silly or foolish Edmund is for doing it. And then you're right, he then does go through. One of the things we haven't talked about, Phil, and I really want to get your perspective on this because you are an illustrator, is the illustrations in these books. So the illustrations were done. I think it's what's the illustrator's name? Is it Pauline?
Pauline
Pauline
Baines.
Baines. Okay. There's an illustration, and I'm looking on page 28 here, of Edmund going through the wardrobe. And it's much different than how I'm imagining it in my mind. Are you looking at the same picture?
I am. It it almost looks like the coats are on a ski lift.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Or like a industrial dry cleaners. Like where they actually do the cleaning.
Yeah, it looks like a dry cleaners.
Yep.
It-
Maybe it
it's
is.
so. I mean, obviously, we're just getting a little like a vignette here. It seems almost then like shouldn't he have been able to walk in? Like, how big is this wardrobe that he can even like? I would think as soon as you stepped in, you'd be able to go, oh wait, this isn't normal. But Edmund
Right.
even walks in for like a couple of steps before he realizes that. Like he's pushing past rows of coats. So how many rows of coats are in this wardrobe?
So I'm also curious, like, it sounds like we know there are at least two, right? Like there's a second row of coats behind the first row.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was earlier in the book. But if you're we both grew up in the 90s, so what's the only other wardrobe you really know about if you didn't have a wardrobe in your house?
I don't know.
And the one I picture is the one from Beauty and the Beast.
Oh
The
yeah,
one
yeah,
that
yeah. That's good. Yeah, that's true.
so like that one's not huge, but it is pretty big. But I also think about like, Disney kind of everything's drawn so you can make things enormous.
Uh huh.
And then for the actual movie, I'd be curious to see like just what the size was because I think I've seen a clip of that recently, like a thumbnail in a preview of a trailer or something, and it's like it's massive, like very very much oversized.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'm curious what Lewis was picturing in this when he described it. Like, was it just a normal wardrobe that was slightly larger than normal, or who knows?
Well, and my question is too, when it comes to these illustrations, are these illustrations like canon? You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
are these illustrations exactly how it's supposed to be, or is this just Pauline Baines' interpretation? Right? Like, I mean, in my head, it might look a little bit differently to me. But is this are these the clothes that Edmund is wearing right now? Is this exactly what all the coats look like, or is this just her interpretation? And I think that the easy answer is, well, it can be whatever I want it to be, right? If in my head it looks different, and that's true, right? In my head it looks different, that's fine. But these illustrations do kind of help me fill in some of the world. And so I think as we go along, I'll want to hear a lot of your thoughts about these because there's illustrations throughout this entire book.
Yeah. For this one in particular, I think that the illustrator is deliberately choosing to not show much more. You kind of have like what looks about the shape of a thumbprint, with just the shadows of the darkness of the wardrobe around a handful of coats, and then Edmund inside. I'm also curious, did Lewis have control over the illustrations? I would imagine at this point he is, has a certain amount of pull with his publisher and he's able to get what he wants. But I also note that a lot of authors can't even control, in their contract, at least, they can't control what goes on the cover of their books.
When we get to a certain point in the story, I actually have a quote to share with you
Okay.
about what C.S. Lewis thought of some of Pauline Bain's work.
Okay.
We're
I
not there
look forward to
yet,
that.
but don't let me forget. I'll tell you afterwards because I don't want to spoil anything that happens for anyone who's kind of going along with us for the first time in a while. But he actually has there's some really interesting quotes that I think will answer that question.
Okay.
So Edmund gets into this wardrobe. He doesn't find Lucy, and so he kind of just starts walking through this this country, these woods. And again, Edmund's such a jerk. He's like, oh, she's just sulking and whatever. And he's like, she won't accept my apology. And he's still just being really grumpy. And that's when he hears the sound of bells. And C.S. Lewis writes, he listened and the sound came nearer and nearer. And at last there swept into sight a sledge drawn by 2 reindeer. The reindeer were about the size of Shetland ponies, and their hair was so white that even the snow hardly looked white compared with them. Their branching horns were gilded and shone like something on fire when the sunrise caught them. Their harness was of scarlet leather and covered with bells. On the sledge, driving the reindeer, sat a fat dwarf, who would have been about 3 feet high if he had been standing. He was dressed in polar bear's fur, and on his head he wore a red hood with a long gold tassel hanging down from its point. His huge beard covered his knees and served him instead of a rug. So right there, by the way, that's almost, I think, just 4 sentences. I might be a little wrong. C.S. Lewis is employing the semicolon a lot there, which I really love. But tell me, what do you picture when you get this imagery?
First of all, I didn't notice this the first 2 times I read this, but the way he describes how white they were and how the snow hardly looked white compared with them,
Yeah.
that is awesome. Have you ever had like a white shirt that you've worn for a while and then you compare it to a new white shirt and you're like, oh, this is yellow.
This is gross, yeah.
Yeah. Or this is like gray. That's what I picture. That's such a great description. And then he also like the scarlet leather, that is not a usual color for leather. And then covered with bells. He's just telling you what it is, but it paints this incredible image.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I also like that we get the description of the sled and the ponies and the dwarf before we see who's kind of, commanding this sled. So let me go into that. A great
It's a sledge.
sledge. Is that, I mean, is there a
What is a
difference?
sledge?
That's a good question. I just figured it was just a sled, right?
I think it's like a sleigh, right?
Yeah, it's like the same. So maybe it's like just a fancier version of a sled, right?
When I think sled, I think like the thing you lie on your stomach. When I think sledge, I'm picturing like you know, delivering presents on Christmas.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, you're right. So I should say sledge. You're correct. Um, and actually, you know what? One thing I think is different. I think a sledge is pulled by animals. I think that actually might be another part of the
Ah,
difference in definition.
what
Where
do
like
you call it in the Iditarod? Is that a sledge?
I don't know.
Email
Great
us at the
podcasting
Narnia
here. Let's
podcast
just
at
answer some
gmail.com.
questions. Asking questions we don't have the answers to. Um,
We
so
invite you, the reader, to arrive at your own conclusion.
yeah. So in the middle of the sledge sat a very different person, a gray lady taller than any woman that Edmund had ever seen. She also was covered in white fur up to her throat and held a long, straight golden wand in her right hand and wore a golden crown on her head. Her face was white, not merely pale, but white like snow or paper or icing sugar, except for her very red mouth. It was a beautiful face in other respects, but proud and cold and stern. Do you have any thoughts on that, Phil?
Yeah, so it's if you really think about it, all he really said was she was really white and she had red lips. But he also has a few details that kind of increase the power of that. He's saying white like snow or paper or icing sugar. So you're like, if you think of a white face, you're really thinking of like a Caucasian skin tone, kind of like a peachy, but he's describing it like paper or icing sugar. And the icing sugar really drives the point home. So she's like very pale. Um, and then he says it was a beautiful face in other respects. So I don't really know. I think he's saying like it's a beautiful face, but like there's something kind of taking away from that. And then he says, but proud and cold and stern. And then you find out, okay, that's what he's talking about.
Hmm.
And I think that beauty combined with pride can kind of affect how you interpret that beauty.
Yeah, that's good. And it makes me think about the depiction we see of this character, especially in the 2005 Disney adaptation, which we said, again, we're going to, at the end of the season, we're going to watch the BBC adaptation and the Disney adaptation. And we'll talk about most of the stuff there. But we definitely see her as she's more on the pale side. And even in the BBC version, she's depicted as being just very pale and not of just like straight like white,
Yeah.
which I think is almost even more unnatural. Like when you think of her as just being an extremely pale character that still has human qualities, even though I don't think we're there yet, but she is not human. Having just like a white, like just straight white skin, I think kind of takes away any kind of human elements, which is good. It helps me remember, oh, this character is not a human.
Yeah, and it sounds like she is humanoid, like very close to human.
Yeah.
But the details, like the fact that she's taller than any other woman that Edmund had ever seen before, that's significant.
Mm-hmm. So Edmund meets this woman. She asks what he is. He tells her his name is Edmund, and she gets very upset and asks, "Is that how you address a queen?" Um, and Edmund says, "I beg your pardon, Your Majesty. I didn't know," said Edmund. "Not know the Queen of Narnia?" cried she. "Ha! You shall know us better hereafter. But I repeat, what are you?" "Please, Your Majesty," said Edmund. "I don't know what you mean. I'm at school. At least I was. It's the holidays now." And then the chapter just ends.
And then it just ends, and I think that
So
it's
weird.
frustrating to us because we're doing a podcast chapter by chapter. But the more I think about it, I was thinking about this as we were getting closer and closer to the end. If I read that it's the holidays now, I would turn the page and go immediately to the next line. I would just keep reading. And I would kind of glance at the art, but I would keep reading. I would not even notice that we're at a new chapter right now.
Yeah,
And
you'd have to
there
go
are
on.
books that are like that.
Yeah, it's a weird, it's a very abrupt ending, and it's not even like she goes, "Oh, and I'm so and so," or he says, "Oh, I'm a human," and we go, "Oh no," because at this point we might start to have an idea of who this is, right?
Right.
But it just ends really abruptly. And I think that's so interesting. And I think you're right. I think it just draws you. You have to keep reading, right?
Yep.
So
For
before we
sure.
end the chapter, I want to ask you this. Um, I think we all know who this woman is, that this is not actually the Queen of Narnia, but this is actually the White Witch. And I want to ask you this. As a child, did you already know who it was at this point?
So here's the problem. There are certain things that I've grown up with, and I didn't always know, but it felt like, at least when I think back, that I always knew it. I don't remember the first time. It wasn't like my dad sat me down and said, "Here's the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe." I remember reading it in third grade and being like, "I've already read that." I don't remember exactly like when the first time I was hearing the stories. I do remember seeing the set of books uh, on the bookshelf because we had the whole set. We had the really old versions too, so the covers were the old style covers, and the design was clearly from a different time period.
And they
Um,
numbered correctly, right?
they were not numbered correctly, I don't think. I
Oh.
think they were in publication
No,
order.
that's
No,
the
no,
correct way
they
though.
were it was the set that was published together in the wrong order. So,
Oh.
well, now I have to go check because I do remember seeing a different version when I got to school, and that must have been a more recent one.
Oh, okay.
So I have to go look at that bookshelf.
Yeah, so one of the things I always do when I'm reading this book is I read, we read this in my class, and about half of my kids get it. Like, we stop the chapter, and half of them are like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, this is definitely," and I'm like, "No, no, no, stop, stop, stop." Because some of the kids still have not figured out who this is. And
Okay.
I think it depends on if you're someone who's reading into the descriptions. Like, she doesn't necessarily seem extremely mean. She seems stern, but not inherently evil or anything yet. And so if you're someone who's reading this more based off of the dialogue, you might not get there. You might think she's odd or maybe a little mean, but not, this evil witch. Whereas if you're reading into the description more and you might have picked up on it as soon as we learned that this is a woman with a, icing sugar white face. So some of my students right at that moment are like, I know exactly who this is. Whereas other ones, they don't understand it until Lucy tells Edmund, right?
Right.
And so I think that's interesting that people have different kind of reactions. There is no one moment where C.S. Lewis goes, and here it is. It's everyone kind of recognizes this at other times. Like some of my students figured out as she's kind of doing, we won't get into it for next time, but as she's making him things that appear out of thin air. They're like, whoa, that's magic. She must be the witch,
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Do you have any last thoughts before we wrap up this chapter?
I don't. I also thought it'd be funny if we had this podcast just suddenly end the way this chapter did.
I'll cut it out like just in the middle of
Yeah.
our conversation.
And then Evan says, "Please, Your Majesty," and then we just stop. That's it for me. How about for you?
Well, I just want to name kind of where we're ending at. So Lucy has gone to check on Mr. Tumnus. She is in Narnia. We have not heard from her since she went in, but we're assuming that she probably went to go find Mr. Tumnus. Edmund is in the middle of his conversation with the Queen of Narnia, and Peter and Susan are back still, I guess just playing hide and go seek in our world. And so next time we'll be able to finally finish this conversation in chapter 4, which is called Turkish Delight. And in that chapter, Edmund learns more about this magic land from the Queen of Narnia. So if you have enjoyed following along with us, you can dialogue some more with us by email at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com, or you can find us on our Facebook and Twitter pages. We'd love to hear for your thoughts on chapters, themes, or even your history and relationship with this book. We would appreciate a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts because this helps other listeners find the show. Our show's theme was created by Kevin MacLeod, and you can find more of his work in the link in the episode's description. Thank you so much for listening along with us, and we will talk to you soon.
See you next time.